Welcome to the Fayetteville Public Library. Also, welcome to those of you who are watching online. My name is Renee, and I'm delighted to be here this evening with this amazing group of panelists. I'm going to do a brief introduction for everybody, but after we get started, I just want to say that if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you. We're going to keep it casual and informal. We want to hear your questions. With us as panelists this evening are Betsy Broyles Arnold. Betsy is the co-founder of the Broyles Foundation. The Broyles Foundation was founded after Betsy and her family cared for her mother, Barbara Broyles, who lost her life to Alzheimer's. James Magnot is the Assistant Executive Director for Boast, Inc. He oversees statewide operations for developmental disability programs in the Boast service area throughout Arkansas. Collier Moore, who will be joining us shortly, is a partner with RMP LLP, where he has a focused practice in the areas of long-term care, medical planning, asset protection, estate planning, special needs planning, and guardianships. Brandy Schneider is the Director of Aging Services at the Schmeeding Center for Senior Health and Education. She offers individualized education and support to older adults and their families, as well as group support and community education. Dr. Gary McHenry has graciously agreed to be our moderator. He is the Executive Director at the Schmeeding Center for Senior Health and Education. The Schmeeding Center provides opportunities for healthy living and learning for older adults, caregivers, and their families. Nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States are unpaid family caregivers. This is an extremely difficult job to undertake, even when you have every resource and every option available to you. But what do you do if you're trying to do it on your own, or if you don't live near your family, or are struggling one way or another yourself, financially, mentally, or physically? What do you do? Our panelists are going to share issues of concern to caregivers and resources available to families that can help. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. McHenry.
All right,
Thank
excellent.
you.
And I see our final panelist is making his way to his seat. This is Collier Moore. Thank you, Collier. Glad you made it. Understand there was some traffic out there. Just a bit? Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. We're thrilled that you can be here with us this evening. Did you know November is National Family Caregivers Month? That, I'm sure, was the impetus behind the library asking to do this panel now. And because it's National Family Caregivers Month, I decided to go out on the web and take a look at what they were talking about. They have a theme every year, and this year's theme is RAISE, R-A-I-S-E, which stands for Recognize Family Caregivers, Assist Family Caregivers, Include Family Caregivers, Support Family Caregivers, and Engage with Family Caregivers. That was the impetus behind this month's theme. As Renee said, a large number of persons in the United States, the statistic I saw was 83% of the help provided to older adults in the United States is from family caregivers like yourselves, those here in the audience and those that are listening. So and the other thing that I wanted to point out and I'll stop talking and let the panel talk, but there was a quote by Rosalind Carter that I really appreciate, and I got this early on in my career. Her quote was, "There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers." And that's very true. I've found that to be very true in my experience at the Schmeeding Center. So my first question for the panel is, how does your agency go about raising caregivers? Betsy, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I said earlier, that's a loaded question. So at the Broyles Foundation, we are very similar to what the Schmeeding Center does. Because I lost both of my parents to Alzheimer's disease, our focus is mainly, Alzheimer's or any form of dementia. And so what we did after my mom passed away is we wrote a book, and I'll get y'all a book on that. And then what we tried to do is, we stepped back and we thought, what did we need as caregivers? And so, one by one, we added things into our foundation. And so, the first thing that is important is, always, education and training. That's one of the things. That's where my passion lies with this foundation. What I love doing is working with families and helping them understand the disease, how to care for it, how to communicate. And what we do with a lot of caregivers is, I walk the journey with them. So you can reach out to us and to me in particular, and we can visit about what your own situation, your own family situation is, and then I love helping you walk through. Most caregivers don't understand what their options are, and so what I like to do is help people understand what are their options, the pros and cons to each option, and then that way when they have to make a decision, they're making a more informed decision. And so we are, so our passion is the caregivers, and we don't really have anything to do with research whatsoever. It's mainly all about the caregivers. So anything that we can ever do, for anybody out in the audience or online, just call us and we will help you walk through, walk this journey with you and help you understand what it is that you're doing.
Great. James?
Like Dr. McHenry said, I run a company that employs caregivers. So we're going to take that last E and change it from engage to employ.
Okay.
But
Works for me.
But we'll get to the I and raise here in a second. And that started in 1959. Dr. Boast was a pediatrician down in Fort Smith. And he recognized in that era that there was a large portion of our population, of our community, that wasn't integrated into the school system. Children with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, various disabilities like that were segregated out of the school system at that time. And Dr. Boast said, hold on a second here, let's see what they can contribute to our community and to our society. And so he started a preschool for children with disabilities. Fast forward 60 plus years, we are one of the largest providers in the state of Arkansas that provides services across the spectrum, from childhood up until death, for individuals with disabilities. So we employ upwards of 700 caregivers across northwest and western Arkansas. We train them, we encourage them, we help them, we employ them. But one of Dr. Boast's founding concepts was integration. These people should be part of our society. They shouldn't be separate from our society. And so integration, the I and raise, is really what we do. So we integrate people with developmental and intellectual disabilities to engage in their community at whatever capacity they can. We employ caregivers to work with them, to integrate them, and hopefully, if we're doing things right, no one knows that they're their caregiver. They're just with them at the library. They're just with them at Walmart. And so that's really what we hope and strive to do, is integrate not only the individual, but the caregiver as well into their community.
Excellent. Brandy?
So the Schmeeding Center is one of 7 centers on aging, part of the UAMS system. So we really have a statewide focus on healthy aging and family caregivers. So we really, like Betsy and the Broyles Foundation, really try to walk through that journey with the caregiver. So our key is really, let's get someone in and get them help early so that we can continue that that journey with them, start from beginning. We go all the way through a caregiver grief support group, so we really do take that journey very seriously with everyone. So we focus anywhere from family education, and while a primary focus of ours is Alzheimer's dementia, we also focus a lot on family caregivers of people with Parkinson's disease and just other chronic illnesses associated with getting older. We have geriatricians on staff, so they're also able to do some of that more clinical work with us as well. And they really, really focus on family caregivers as part of their practice. So starting with that educational component, but then also that individual consultation, those individual meetings, because every caregiver is different, every caregiving situation is different, every person you're caring for is different. So really being able to personalize and individualize that. But also as caregivers, we want to make sure that we're taking care of you. So we also offer things like brain health and wellness programs for caregivers to keep your brains healthy and your health and well-being at the forefront. We have just started offering some respite options for family caregivers as well, so that individuals can come to this meeting center while the caregivers get a little bit of a break, primarily people in those earlier to moderate stages of dementia. So we want to make sure that we are engaging you in those things that keep you healthy as well, so that it's educating you about whatever disease process that is, but then also educating you about how do you take care of yourself, and not just saying take care of yourself, but how do you actually take care of yourself.
Collier, I wanted to give you time to
Sure.
catch your
I
breath.
needed it. There's a lot of stairs.
So the idea of raise.
Yes.
What do you do in that regard?
Our kind of springboarding off of what Brandy had mentioned, well, I think what we do a lot is education. You may think, well, that's a lawyer. You don't. How does education fall into that? But our goal is to walk someone as soon as we can get in front of them through kind of the legal implications that are going to occur with these transitions. So it may be as simple as, how do we have decision makers in place? Is it a possibility to have powers of attorney? Do we need to look at guardianship? And then after those components, after we've talked through this initial decision-making standpoint, then we're going to jump into what options are out there, what options are available that this family may need to utilize in the future. So from in-home to whatever the next step may be, how do we get those options in place as soon as they're needed? But also, we're going to look at it from how do we do that in the most cost-efficient way as well. A lot of people are real nervous about things they've heard when they're dealing with the costs associated with it. So that's where our job comes in, to navigate that. We look at it from an asset protection standpoint, but also just making sure that the needs are there and that people tap into resources that are available.
Okay, thank you. There's the concept of the primary caregiver, and especially with families that are large, there could be multiple persons involved in the caregiving effort. Any suggestions as to how to navigate that dynamic when you have multiple family members who are seeking to care for their loved one? I'll just make that an open question, whoever wants to respond.
Communication. I cannot stress that enough. And family dynamics can be tough sometimes, and often family members have the best interest of their loved one in mind, but we just have different ideas about what that looks like or what that needs to look like. So really keeping an open line of communication. If one sibling communicates better with another sibling than maybe the third sibling, then let's work that out as a family so that the people who can communicate best with each other are making that happen. But I think communication is the key. And sometimes those family dynamics, they're not working out for the family. You're all trying your best to communicate, and it's just not happening. So my recommendation is find some professional help to help you with that. Find a social worker or a family therapist who can sit down and really mediate those family dynamics for you and help you all get on the same page and make sure that there's a plan in place. Yeah, that's probably, I'm sure Betsy too, you can speak to that. It's probably one of my most challenging issues every single day is and Collier too, I'm sure, working through those family dynamics and just how do we help everyone get on the same page? But communication is really the key, even when it's difficult to communicate with those family members and they may not be on the same page. I do this every day for a living, and when my grandmother had dementia and moved in with my parents, you would think my family had never talked to each other ever before. I mean, it was a lot to try to manage 4 of my aunts and my mother and my grandmother and my sister and me, and then all of the other spouses that were involved. So even we as professionals deal with family dynamics in our personal lives as well.
Yeah.
Well, just to add a little bit, so, so I'm one of 6 too. And so we would have, we could never agree, but I think one of the elements, so I'm very impressed that the 3 of y'all are all here, because I'll say a lot of times that's unusual in my experience.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's true. But I mean, I'm impressed that there's 3 of you in one family, because you don't see that very often. And so one of the things that I've found just in my own experience is that, because I have 4 older brothers, and they really weren't involved at all with my mom, and very little with my dad. And so I think that there's a lot, like you said, that the family dynamics, there can be, it's hurtful. And it's really hard, like she said, to navigate through that, where, there's times I felt like I was just drowning. I was like, I just need some help, please. And so not having anger, because not everybody is a caregiver. And that's hard to accept when you're needing help, but they're just not. And so, so working through that, like she said, got to get some counseling and some help to help you work through those family dynamics, because I've seen it destroy families. So you got to be really careful not to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Apparently, we're all one of 6. I too am one of 6. And so communication is absolutely number 1, hands down. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I would add to that identifying skill sets and assets within that family. Everybody has something to contribute.
That's true.
But not what they're contributing is not the same for each person.
Right.
In our family, I was asked, why did I get into this field? Well, I was born into a family with an older brother with cerebral palsy. So from birth, I was just part of it. I was a caregiver, I was a case manager, I was an appointment scheduler, I was all those things. But what my folks did was identify what each of us could do for our brother. And those things were very, very different. So whether you're talking about a brother or a parent or whatever, identify what each caregiver or each person in the family can contribute. And like you said, not everybody's a caregiver, but maybe there's a financial planner in the family.
Right.
Maybe there's a lawyer in the family. Have them tackle those pieces for you so that you can do what you do.
Yeah. Collier, have you come across that?
We
the
do.
family dynamic, and you're interacting with the financial person, and then
Yes,
Yeah.
and what's difficult about that sometimes is just getting everyone to understand when they have their different skill sets, that here's our goal. We're
them on the
all
same
marching
page.
towards the same
Right,
goal,
here's the
but here's how we're going to get there. But the reason why it's so important is really because if families aren't communicating, aren't doing those things, then guys like me get involved in the way that you don't want guys like me involved. And that's in guardianship court, where we're fighting over
Yeah.
who's going to make these medical decisions, who's going to do the financial decisions. Nobody wins in that situation. It's definitely something that if a family just had that preventative measure of communicating on the front end, sitting down, getting someone who can objectively look at the facts, objectively help them navigate that situation, it could resolve so much problems way ahead of time.
yeah.
And going off of that, back to communication, but what Collier was saying is have the hard conversations. Have those hard conversations. It's not easy and it's awkward and there'll be tears, but have those conversations. What happens when somebody's not here? What happens when mom or dad are not here? What happens when the primary caregiver is not here? What happens in those situations? Because oftentimes we experience as an agency families that haven't had those conversations, and it makes it 10 times harder on everybody involved when those conversations weren't had as a full family.
Yeah, and have those conversations from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have those conversations when you're in crisis, because then emotions are running high. You know, you're not making good decisions anyway, and so, you know, have those conversations early on when you first become a caregiver. You know, recognize that there's help out there to do that from the beginning.
And really, even, wouldn't you say, even before there's a need for caregiving, the Rosalind Carter quote says that it's likely that all of us are going to experience some aspect of caregiving. I'll relate the fact, my wife is a nurse, and she started having conversations with her father very early on. He wasn't sick, but things progressed and he began to lose his health. So by the time we got to that point, a lot of decisions had been made, and guess what? They were made by him. He had input on what was being done with him going forward. So I think that's important. Begin early.
Is it okay if I
Sure,
add one thing?
absolutely.
I think what happens, especially with dementia, is that people aren't prepared. In their mind, it's never gonna happen to us.
Right.
And so then when it occurs and they see little signs, we make excuses for it. Well, what's normal aging of the brain? And so then all of a sudden, when there is an incident, you know, that makes you have to sit up and go, oh, okay, there is a problem here, then you aren't prepared. I mean, you haven't had those conversations. And like my dad, he was never going to die, you know. I mean, even though he had everything in place. But, I mean, people just don't, they don't prepare for it. They just really don't.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, it would be great if they did, you know, just from what everybody said. But I find that people aren't prepared, you know, at all. No one's prepared for dealing with Alzheimer's, or, you know, because unless you've experienced it, you have no idea what it is you're walking into. And so, but yes, if they can and would, it sure makes life a lot easier.
Sure. Collier, I forgot to ask you if you're one of 6.
I'm one of 3, so
I know the audience, inquiring minds wanted to know.
I've messed up the routine. So.
Okay, well, you're the anomalous one here, and so am I. On the topic of financial and health records, the buck winds up having to stop somewhere with somebody. What are the things that someone who suddenly becomes a caregiver needs to take into account from a financial and a legal situation?
First thing is just who's going to have the authority to do those things in the future. That's the biggest. The most important document that a person can have are powers of attorney for financial and healthcare decision-making. By far, those are the kind of the foundational documents that every individual will need, because then that's so helpful when families are now dealing with, you know, reaching out to an insurance company, trying to get information from a medical provider. It gives you the authority, it gives you the permission to access information. And that's key, because a lot of times families will walk in and they don't have any idea. It's been a private thing for parents or for that loved one who has all of this financial information. So they're on a scavenger hunt, essentially looking for what's out there, and then they have to navigate through that. Well, if you don't have the right tool to do that, then our only alternative is to pursue a court guardianship where a declaration of incapacity has occurred. And that's just something we don't want families to have to go through if we can avoid it, and it can easily be avoided. But that's the key.
Yeah. For our other panelists, any examples of situations where people have made good decisions or maybe not so good decisions along the financial and the legal lines?
Yeah, in my neck of the woods, oftentimes it is thought of if you have money, you don't qualify for services. If you come from means, you don't qualify for different resources in the community, and that's categorically false. Collier can speak much more to how do you put things in order so that you still qualify for the services and resources out there, regardless of what your family income is. But just getting it out there that just because you come from a stable family or you have financial resources doesn't mean you don't qualify for all of the different resources out there.
Now I had one little, to
Sure.
hop in off of that. The biggest thing that we see often is this fear of going to lose the house. How many times have y'all heard that? In the state of Arkansas, there's no reason a person should ever lose a home for accessing benefits. That law was changed last session. There's certain types of deeds that can be done to protect that family home. And so we see a lot of people not access care that they desperately need for that fear. And they could get services in home to assist family to stay at home as long as possible for that fear. And it's something that there's a quick remedy for to protect that asset.
I think one reason, too, it's so important to get exactly what he's saying, is that we see elder abuse, too. People taken advantage of. And once, sometimes family members see that there's an issue, that they do take advantage of the situation. And I've seen people, take out loans and have them sign the loan. And so it is important to do exactly what Collier's saying, to get all that information in order.
It is such a priority, I think, for those of us who work with caregivers, that there is no one who walks through my office, whether it's a family caregiver or just an older adult, that I don't say, have you seen an attorney? Have you seen an elder law attorney about all of your powers of attorney, about estate planning, future planning? It's just really important to get those things in place.
I think one of the things that I think is important to point out is that in Northwest Arkansas, we're very fortunate to have so many resources available to us in this area. And the issue becomes knowing where those resources are and how to interact with them. When I first started working with the Smeeting Center, Dr. Larry Wright, who is a geriatrician, used the term the age maze. And essentially what he meant by that is when someone is suddenly diagnosed with a condition and then the family becomes caregivers, then now we're navigating a maze of what do I need next and where do I need to go and how do I need to do that. So talk about navigating the age maze. New diagnosis of a situation, the individual still has all of their faculties, but it is a progressive situation. So where do we start? What do we look for?
I would say look for an expert. So find somebody who has connections with those resources, who can help walk you through things that, when you become a caregiver, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what resources are even available out there. So finding someone who can say, here are the resources that are available. We're going to come up with a plan with you and with your loved one for what each of these next steps look like. And then we're going to help connect you to those resources so that we're not just handing you, here is a list of 20 nursing homes that you can choose from. That's overwhelming if you're just handing someone a list of resources. And often if you're going to your primary care physician, they have the best of intentions, but they're going to hand you a list. So find someone who has connections within the community, who knows those resources, who can help you navigate through that. I hear all the time, one example I have is, well, I can't take care of my mom at home anymore, so I just have to move her to a nursing home. Well, there are a lot of things that we can do within that continuum that's not just home to nursing home, if you know what those resources are. But for the layperson just coming into it, we are very, very, like Gary said, very, very fortunate to have resources in Northwest Arkansas, but they don't do us any good if we don't know that they're there or how to access those. So reaching out to an expert to help navigate through what those are, what they mean. They can be very complicated. Assisted living versus nursing home versus assisted living with memory care versus home care, medical home health. It can get very, very complicated very quickly. So having someone who can talk you through what those look like and what those steps are is really important.
Any other comments on that?
I think she laid it out there pretty good.
And any of us are happy to help you with all of that. I mean, we're
Yes.
all, yeah.
These are resources in front of you. So if any of them brought their business cards, perhaps you would grab one. I'm sure that the library will make contact information available for the remote audience as well. So if there is interest on the part of the remote audience in reaching any one of these individuals, just reach out to the library and we can get those. Let me forewarn the local audience here that you too can ask questions if you like. I'm happy to keep on asking my list of questions, but if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. So now you know. Yes, 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 yes. Well, let's see. The idea of caregiver stress. Have you heard of that? Caregiver stress. I've heard that term quite a bit. And the way it's laid out in this particular question is as you would in an emergency in an airplane, you put your mask on first. So talk about how to address what are some of the stresses? I mean, obviously there are many, I'm sure, and at different phases, but what are some of the stresses that caregivers can expect, and how do they put on their mask first? What are the tools to help them find some respite? There's a good word.
Well, I'll let you start, because you were talking about it earlier.
Yes, we were talking about it earlier, and it goes back to putting on your own mask first, in that if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And that sounds a little bit cliche, especially in these circles, but it's so true. And I appreciate that you use the word respite, because caregiving can be relentless. It can be nonstop. It can seem like there's no end to it. It can be extremely isolating. You think that you're in your house caring for, and just the whole world's going by you while you're doing what you're doing. So first is recognizing that you're not alone. There are caregivers all over these communities, and there's resources for them. And secondly is taking a break, finding a way to take a break, to find that respite, to separate yourself from what you do day in and day out is so, so important, because you can't do it day in and day out for years upon years upon years without a break. You just can't. Nobody can. And so really finding that outlet for you, and that's hard, right? Because you love this person. You and often in most situations provide for their every want and need all day long. So to just go away for the weekend, a lot of caregivers feel guilt with that. They feel guilt with leaving or enjoying something of their own passion or their own enjoyment. There's no guilt in that. There's no guilt in that. And honestly, you're going to be a better caregiver if you do those things for yourself. Because when you're not at your best, you're not providing the best care. So you've got to be at your best in order to do what you do, your vocation, the other days.
And I'll get more scientific maybe. So, we were stressing earlier brain health and wellness programs and just the importance of taking care of yourself. So it's not something that we all just sit up here and say because it's the cliche and we want you to do it. There is real scientific research and evidence to support that caregivers who don't get a break, who are not taking care of themselves, are at an increased risk for their own health issues, dementia later in life, because when you are a caregiver and you're under that stress, the cortisol levels in your brain are continuously higher than they should be. So basically you're on fight or flight response all the time. how do I solve this problem? Do I want to leave this problem? How do I work through this problem? So when your brain is constantly on that fight or flight response, your memory actually becomes impaired. Your emotional responses become impaired, and you have decreased emotional responses to things. So, when we talk about taking care of yourself, it's a real concern for us that, just like James said, if you cannot take care of yourself and something happens to you, who takes care of the person that you love, that you're caring for? And so, we say things like take care of yourself, and it sounds very simplistic when we say it, and very, very hard to put into place, right? It's easy to sit up here and say take care of yourself, and very hard to do those things that we're all asking you to do, like take those breaks. So again, I think you're going to hear a common theme. Ask for that help. Ask for that help early. Have somebody come and walk through what are the barriers to being able to go. How do we work through that guilt and help you understand that you're not being selfish when you're doing these things, that you are actually out of love taking care of yourself so that you can better take care of the person that you're taking care of. So ask for that help early on and help somebody sort through what is preventing me from doing this. Are there other options out there that I can get to stay with my loved one? Can I ask a family member that I haven't asked before because we haven't communicated well in the past? How do we put those things into place?
It's very important. I was 42 years old when I moved home to take care of my mother, and I did everything wrong. I mean, I never took a vacation. I never left. I barely went to dinner, with my family. And the problem is when you go to dinner or you leave town, in the back of your mind, it's what is she doing? Are they taking care of her? Because in our mind, no one can take care of them like we can. We understand what they're doing and what they're saying. So, I mean, I agree with everything that they've said. And two things mainly one thing that I want to say is, if you can turn that guilt into grace, like they were saying, it's so important, because there's so much guilt that goes in, to this disease, because you're never going to do it right. I mean, it's a trial and error. You're learning, as the disease progresses, and caregivers are always having to adapt their lifestyle to the changes that are going on with the disease. So you've got to fill your cup up, because you're pouring out all day long, and if you don't fill yours up, like he said, you can't be as good a caregiver. So it is very important to take care of yourselves.
One of the things that we encountered with COVID is we all became very isolated. And one of the things that I recognized at the meeting center when we announced that we were reopening, people were very interested in getting out again and being with other people. So from two perspectives is where my question is going to come. Caregiver isolation, where they isolate themselves, as you talked about. You didn't go out to eat, you didn't go do anything, so you were isolating yourself. But the patient or your loved one also begins to feel that isolation as well. And I'm going to throw some low-hanging fruit here. We had an event where there were two people with Parkinson's that were sitting in chairs at our center. Their loved ones, their caregivers, had left. These two individuals had the most wonderful time sitting there talking to each other. So what can we do to encourage getting rid of isolation from either side, caregiver or the patient? What types of things can be done?
I feel like it's just, like with my mom, I'll throw her out as an example. A lot of things that we did early on were some of the things that she was doing prior to the time that she got sick. We worked in a soup kitchen. We had certain days that we did things. I mean, Monday, she got her hair done. Tuesday, we worked in the soup kitchen, and Wednesday, we did Meals on Wheels. So if we ever had to organize a doctor's appointment or anything, we did it on one of those 3 days. And that, because we were already getting out. And then the other days, we would stay more at home and do things like that. So you have to look at the situation and what they're willing to do. And early on, in the early stage, in probably 3/4, maybe at least halfway through the middle stage, you want to get out. You want to do things because, especially with Alzheimer's, as a disease progresses, they get to where they're really more comfortable at home, and that's when the isolation really sets in because they really don't want to leave. They don't want to get dressed. They're comfortable. They almost go down to 1 or 2 rooms, and so. So early on, absolutely. And then from your standpoint, the caregiver standpoint, as we've said earlier, you've got to fill your cup. You've got to get out and work with your family or bring in caregivers. This meeting trains caregivers. It's a great resource for bringing people in. But you've got to sit back and you got to try to have balance. I think balance is a key word. And how do I balance my life? Because I didn't, and it took me a long time to recover from it. And I was young. I was 42 years old when I moved back, and so I can't imagine, having to. Well, the sad thing is, none of y'all really know this, but my husband has dementia now, and so, but his is more. He had post polio, so I don't know what cycle it's going to take, but he definitely has it again. So part of me is like, oh my gosh, he asked me the other day what he was writing a check, and he said, "What year is it?" Yeah. And it just, that was I'm really going to have to accept the fact that, because that's a big question. Yeah. It's those things that snap us in. But so I think finding balance with your family and finding support is key from an isolation. Get out and do everything you can right now because they hit a point where they don't. Then you are isolated at home.
Yeah.
And I think, and to piggyback on that, I think it's important for caregivers to connect with other caregivers, to recognize that I am not the only person going through this and I am not alone in this. So I know the Broyles Foundation has support groups, Meeting Center has several support groups, Alzheimer's Association has various support groups around Parkinson's support groups. Find a way to connect with other caregivers because it's good to hear what they're going through, but it's also great as a group problem-solving tool. Regardless of the illness or the chronic condition that they're experiencing. My mom did this, my dad did this. Oh, when I was going through this is what we tried, and so it's also great problem solving. We have a lot of people who will attend one of our support groups and then they go out for lunch afterwards, or they go out for lunch before, exchange phone numbers just so that they can check in on each other and make sure that they're giving each other that support too, so you can build that community around yourself. Of course, you don't always want to focus on caregiving, so it's good to connect with other caregivers, but then also, like Betsy was saying, get out there and do those things that you enjoy and make sure that you're maintaining those friendships.
Well, and when you create a community, you interact with other people that are going through similar things that you and your family are going through. Balance is so key. You said that. The balance is having a balanced life. But Dr. McHenry's example made me think of something in that there is dignity in risk, right? Mm-hmm. So his example of 2 individuals with Parkinson's and their caregivers leaving, there's some risk to that, right? Mm-hmm. They could walk out, they could go to the bathroom, they could walk out they could do all kinds of different things. But there's some dignity in allowing adults to have risks in their life. And that's really important. But the more important thing is making sure you guys are all comfortable and on the same page with that risk. Because if half the family's okay with it and the other family is not, now you got problems.
Then I can.
Then
You're seeing calling.
And then,
Then we can call your
his
call.
number is 442. Yeah.
Okay, not doing any target practice or anything, Go ahead.
I think he said he had some questions.
Yes, please.
So, there's I call it the caregiver ripple effect. If you are a caregiver, and like in our situation, with several family members, well, you've also got spouses and offspring and stuff who are, you also have spouses, children that are also affected by this. And so when do you make that decision, okay, we can't really all do this, even as a family, when do we bring in outside help? And then the next question is, how do you convince, in this case my mom, that this is okay? These people are going to be fun and interesting. I don't know, it's kind of a hurdle. So one would be getting all the family on the same page. Look, we're making a lot of sacrifices here, and it's fantastic, and we get to have some really good moments when we're not having behavioral issues with the one we're caring for, that you feel it's like the calm before the storm again, But when do you decide, look, there's too much sacrifice, we need outside help, and then how do you convince your fellow family members this is a good idea? And then how do you get the money to do that when you don't have power of attorney, or and then how do you convince your loved one, look, how do we get caregivers to be accepted by the one we're giving care to?
You want to
That
start
was
with
4
one?
questions, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wow, that's a whole hour
Yeah.
session right
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And so I'll start with the, how do you know when it's the right time to start bringing in outside help? And, when you start asking yourself, is this the right time to bring in outside help? You're probably already starting to feel some of that. You're saying to yourself, we're sacrificing a lot and this is getting harder. So when you start to ask yourself those questions, that's probably the right time to start looking at what are those options, what are those next steps. Because when you start to ask yourself those questions is when we want to start putting those plans in place. We don't want you coming to one of us saying, today is the last day I can do it. I cannot do it one more day. Now I have to do something right now. So when you start to ask yourself, I just don't know if I can keep doing this. We want to start putting those plans into place. And, and it's a very individual, it's very individual for each family member. How do you get each family member to sort of come to that same place? How do you talk to them about that? So it's very individualized for each particular situation. So again, I think it's good for you to reach out to an expert and say, okay, here's what we've decided. Let's have a family conference, talk through it with all of our different family members, those who are here doing the care, those who may be further away and not in on that day-to-day care. That's often where that disconnect happens. Mm-hmm. Those people who are doing the day-to-day care and those people who are not doing that day-to-day care. And you have very different caregiving experiences based on that. So, just asking for some expert advice and help and recommendations. Do you want to keep?
So it's very difficult to bring someone in the house, especially when it's the mother, because someone is coming into my house and I don't like it. And so there are a lot of, so we like to call it creative communication, and there are different ways to bring them in. I mean, there's, it helps a lot of time if you bring them in on a social level, have them over for dinner. This is so like if you got a caregiver from the meeting center, so you would have a conversation with them prior to the time that they came out. And again, okay, so a lot depends on the family situation. But if you, then this is where you get creative. And everybody has to be on the same page, but you might, I'm just going to give you one example. You might bring someone in and say, well, this is an old friend of mine, they've moved back, I'm going to have, they're going to come over and have dinner with us. And I think it's important to see how they interact with each other, because that could stop it right there if they don't,
That's your informal interview,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And so there are sometimes you can be very honest and say, we need a caregiver and try to bring them in. But then there are creative ways to bring them in and get them situated. And you tend to say that I need the help. You know, it's not necessarily for them. You want to put it off on you. I need help. I need help with certain things in the house. And you may even have them come in and, you know, cook some meals or even do a little bit of cleaning just to get that association. But I think if you can start it off with a positive emotional memory type situation with them, where you know, because sometimes if you just bring someone in, it's negative from the beginning. I don't want them here. Why are they here? And then that person is not really going to work out because your loved one already has a negative emotional memory towards them. So there, you know, and these are conversations that we can have with you, but there are different ways to try to bring. There's a lot of different ways. You know, I mean, we've tried all different kind of things, and some are, you know, have worked really well, and so that's just a conversation that you can, you know, visit with any of us up here about.
Is it-
Just brought a question, just in that way you were talking about that, or what you were saying there. Emotional memory, because if I'm understanding what you're saying, my mom will just forget everything. I mean, she doesn't remember anything except for stuff that happened a long time ago. She'll say over and over, and she can still speak Spanish and Russian. But there's certain things eventually she remembers. And she'll remember, I don't like being around that person, she said. She remembers she doesn't like to ride with me when I'm driving. Remember, like, I'll tell her, you know, we'll go over my daughter's in a play, and she's going to be in a play at the end of November. My mom will remember that, and you know, that's baffling to me how some of these things she can. Is that what that is? This had an emotional kind of a memory to it, where they could have negative or positive feelings about a person or a place.
Because that's a very positive, fun experience. So even though you're doing it now, it's in her. But she talks about you guys going fishing. So,
Yeah, that's it.
In case the remote audience didn't hear that, I'm going to repeat that the question has to do with remembering some things and not remembering other things.
Okay, and emotional memory.
And emotional memory.
Emotional memory is one of the most important things that having to do with Alzheimer's disease because, so like when you leave today, you're going to walk out of here and you're going to think to yourself, this was either a great panel, I learned something, or you didn't, and you automatically file it back. We don't even think about it. It's what we've done our entire lives. And so one of the things, it took me a while to understand this about the disease, but they lose their memories, they lose their cognitive abilities, but they never lose their emotional memory. So it's very important how you communicate with them, because if you upset them and they get angry, you know, then they file it back. Yeah. And what I've learned, and so that's why, you know, there's a lot of things. I mean, I have a whole talk on this in general, and Brandy too. And so, but it's important that, so why they don't like certain people and things like that, and sometimes it can be their own family members, is that they remind them of maybe a cousin or somebody when they were growing up that was mean to them. And so they don't like that person. So it's real important to always keep things positive. See, our minds process things positive one way and negative another. They will hold on to the negative a lot longer than they will the positive. Even though that's good that she remembers you taking her fishing, and I mean that is a positive emotional memory. But what happens is that if they decide, your loved one, all of a sudden, because of maybe the way you've treated her or talked to her through the past, all of a sudden has a negative emotional memory towards you, if they're very far along in the disease, it's very difficult to change it. I'm not sure you can, because their disability is short-term memory loss. So even though you can talk to them in that moment and say, I'm so sorry, you know, I shouldn't have gotten, you know, I shouldn't have yelled at you, or whatever the situation, arguing. You're never going to win if you argue, okay? You know, I'm sure you've already figured that out. But, and so they can say in that moment, yes, I forgive you, or that's okay. The problem is then they forget it, because that's their main disability. And so emotional memory is very important when you're dealing with someone that has dementia. And so, I know I've probably gotten off track, but you know, it's really important that you treat them with dignity and kindness, and how you communicate in your tone is so important, because all that goes into emotional memory, because everything you do, they file it back. We just do it, you know, without thinking about it. And so, I'm not even sure if I answered your question, because I got off on that, I'm sorry. But it's really important, the emotional memory side of it, because it's interesting, they never lose it.
Yeah.
You know, all the way to the end. Like is it your mom or your dad?
Mom.
Your mom, she, you know, when she nears the end of the disease, like my mom, she didn't know my name, and she didn't know that I was her daughter, but she knew that I was someone that she trusted and that she loved, even though she didn't know who I was. So that's emotional memory, you see. And so it's comforting. You know, it's okay that she didn't know my name. She still loved me, and she knew that I was someone important to her and that she trusted. So, I mean, so it goes all the way to the end with when you're dealing with someone that has dementia.
And don't you think it's important to work with what you have, what they can remember, what is pleasant for them, work with that, and continue to encourage down that line. I'll share a personal anecdote. I haven't told you that I'm the 10th of 10, so I got these guys beat.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And my
That'd be
oldest
hard.
brother dealt with dementia, and in the early phase of it, one of the things that I did that was very simple is I went to Cracker Barrel with him, took him out to eat at Cracker Barrel. Well, if you look on, my brother was 85 years old, and if you look up on the wall at Cracker Barrel, you see things from a long time ago. And so we had many pleasant discussions about things that he remembered. And I think it's good to encourage that type of conversation, because you might get into a place where that emotional memory says, I had a good time with you. I enjoyed you. I don't know who you are, but I really enjoyed you.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's very good. I think are we up to an hour only, or?
How about one more question, and then we'll wrap up?
One more question. Does the audience want to offer one more question?
I have one in that, like you said at the beginning, there was some emphasis on how prevalent this is in society. It's big, and we didn't know it until it happened. Where nobody prepares you for this. There's no courses or education on you're going to be caring for somebody, whether it's unfortunate circumstances or just inevitable aging. Why isn't there more attention to that, where funding can actually be generated from federal, state? How do we do that as a society? That's my, when I'm going through this, I'm thinking, we're fortunate as we're a family all in the same state, and so we can help with resources. The other people really must struggle with this. And how do we get there where this is a bigger deal, where it's in front of everybody, so that it's, and you guys probably experience that all the time. Lack of resources is probably one of your biggest issues. Is there a flag we can carry?
You're talking about cultural change. And cultural change, I mean, that's a whole different topic we can talk about, but talking about it, normalizing it, you know, part of American culture is to keep it in the house, keep it to yourself, keep it within the family. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Normalize it. Make it an everyday conversation when you go to work or you go to church or you go wherever in your community. That this is my life. This is part of my life.
I think reach out to your politicians too, because you're right, there's not enough funding, out there. And so, just reaching out and saying, we need more research. We need more funding to, number one, find a cure. We desperately need a cure, but just to make more awareness of it and provide more resources to people who are out there, working for it. I think that's a big part. Just emailing and saying, we need help. We need more resources, because it's way underfunded and always has been. It's amazing, because it is the silver tsunami. It is what's coming. And it's mind-boggling that the federal government doesn't see that. They fast-tracked AIDS, they fast-tracked cancer. Why can they not fast-track this? And so just, ask your congressmen and your senators. I think that's a lot of it.
I think you're going to find local legislative individuals are pretty receptive to this right now. There's some initiatives that are going to take place, I know, in next session that are going to be designed to seek more resources for in-home care. The rules have long been skewed towards institutionalized level of care. That's starting to shift, and I noticed it personally 2 years ago through last session, and I know that that's going to be something that's coming up in this session. So your local folks are going to be the keeper of the purse strings for some of these things in the near future.
Okay. Well, all politics are local, so start talking to your local politicians about this. Express your situation. Make sure they know. And one other area that I'll bring up as a final thought, education is the key to pushing this forward. And I'm not just talking about education of older adults. I'm talking about young people. I have a personal anecdote again. My grandfather came to live with us when he started to lose his health. And it wasn't diagnosed as dementia back then, but that's probably what it was. The only thing I knew as a young child was he was mean to my mama. And I was angry at him for being mean to my mama. He didn't know he was being mean. But I think educating young people about this will bring up a generation of people that understand more and that care more about this subject. We're often just thrust into this role as adults, but we didn't have, as you say, any background in it. Nothing was said to us. There's a group called the Association of Caregiving Youth that I'm familiar with that that try to cater to young people that are providing care. So there are many resources out there to consider. Okay, well, let's thank our panel for their excellent suggestions. As I said, the library will make available contact information for those of you that wish to reach out further. So with that, have a good evening.
Thank you all for being here.